By the ninth morning without power, the gravel road outside Clara Bennett's farm no longer looked like a country road. It looked like a waiting line. Pickup trucks stretched past the mailbox and around the bend, their beds loaded with sacks of corn, oats, and wheat. Men who should have been checking cattle or hauling feed stood in the August heat with their arms folded, watching Clara's old barn. There was no generator running behind it, no diesel engine, no electric motor, just water. The creek behind the barn slipped through a narrow wooden channel, struck the paddles of a homemade wheel, and pulled a belt through an opening in the wall. Inside, the old runner stone turned slowly over the stationary bedstone beneath it. Corn went in, feed came out. The iron frame around the stones was scarred with rust, grease, and nearly 100 years of use. And hanging from one corner was an auction tag Clara had never bothered to remove. $50. At the very end of the line stood Mason Reed. 9 months earlier, Mason had looked at that machine, laughed with everyone else, and told Clara the scrapyard might give her $60 for it. Now there were 2 sacks of grain in the back of his truck. He watched the stone turn, then he asked quietly, "How much can she grind before dark?" Nobody answered, because 9 months earlier, everyone had been asking a very different question. Why would Clara Bennett pay $50 for that? 9 months earlier, nobody wanted the mill. It sat behind an equipment shed at a farm auction outside Cedar Hollow, half hidden by weeds and 3 generations of things people had stopped needing. There were rusted cultivator teeth, cracked wagon rims, a hand corn sheller with no handle, and beside them, the old grain mill. Its iron frame was orange with rust. The wooden feed hopper had split along one side. The drive belt was gone. One pulley had frozen in place, and the 2 grinding stones inside were so dirty nobody could tell whether they were worn out or merely neglected. When the auctioneer reached it, he started at $200. Silence, 100. Still nothing, 75. A man near the back laughed. "Charge by the pound," he said. "Might get more that way." Then Clara raised her hand. 50. The auctioneer looked around. Nobody answered. Sold. That was when Mason Reed walked over. Mason owned the largest feed grinding operation in the county, and unlike Clara, he had equipment built in this century. He looked at the mill, then at Clara. $50 isn't bad. For half a second, she thought he meant it. Then Mason smiled. "Scrapyard might give you 60. The men around him laughed. Clara didn't. She didn't defend herself either. She crouched beside the machine and brushed dirt away from the end of the main shaft. Then, she wrapped both hands around it and pulled. Nothing. She changed her grip, pulled again. This time, the shaft moved. Barely. Less than an inch. But Clara felt something the others didn't. The shaft wasn't broken. It was resisting. There was a difference. She looked through the rusted frame at the old stones, then toward the pulley. "Could you help me load it?" she asked the auctioneer. Mason shook his head as he walked away. By sunset, Clara had that 100-year-old mill chained to a trailer. Everyone else saw $50 worth of scrap. Clara had felt 1 inch of movement. And sometimes, 1 inch is enough to make you wonder what everyone else has missed. Clara's interest in the old mill had not started at the auction. It had started 8 winters earlier, during an ice storm that took down nearly every power line between Cedar Hollow and the county highway. At the time, Clara was working on a dairy farm 20 miles east of town. The farm had modern equipment, automatic milking units, electric pumps, heated water lines, a backup generator big enough, on paper, to keep the essential systems running. But sometime after midnight, the grid went down. The generator did not start. Clara tried it once, then again. Nothing. The battery had weakened in the cold. The fuel tank was lower than anyone realized, and fallen trees had blocked the road badly enough that no service truck was coming before daylight. Clara still remembered standing inside that milking room at 2 in the morning. Everything around her had cost thousands of dollars. Everything was built to save labor. Everything worked beautifully, as long as electricity reached the building. Without it, The room was almost silent. That silence stayed with her. Not because Clara decided technology was bad. She never believed that. What bothered her was something simpler. If a machine was essential, she wanted to understand what made it move. And if one source of power failed, she wanted another way to keep going. So when she brought the $50 mill home, she did not begin by looking for an electric motor. She cleaned the shaft, freed the frozen pulley, opened the housing, then she walked behind the barn toward the creek. It was not a dramatic river. At its widest point, it was barely 12 feet across. But 50 yards upstream from the barn, the water crossed an old stone diversion built generations earlier to feed a stock pond that no longer existed. Below it, the creek dropped nearly 4 feet before leveling out again. Clara stood there for a long time. The width of the creek was not what interested her anymore. The drop was. Water did not need to move fast forever. It only needed somewhere to fall. She crouched beside the lower bank and watched the current spill through the stones. Then she looked back toward the barn. The question was no longer whether the old mill could turn. It was whether 4 feet of falling water could give her enough useful power to make it work. Clara spent the next 3 weekends learning how much difference there was between moving water and useful power. At first, the idea seemed almost embarrassingly simple. Build a wheel, let the creek turn it, run a belt from the wheel to the mill, grind grain. So she built the first wheel from salvaged lumber and steel brackets, set it into a narrow race she dug beside the creek, and waited until Saturday morning to try it. The wheel turned immediately, not fast, but steadily. For the first few seconds, Clara smiled. Then she slipped the belt over the pulley. The smile disappeared. The water wheel slowed. The belt tightened. Inside the barn, the old millstone moved perhaps a quarter turn, then stopped. Clara increased the water flow. The wheel pushed harder. The belt began to slap. A bearing on the mill housing heated so quickly she could smell the old grease. Then the belt jumped completely off the pulley and struck the wall hard enough to leave a black mark across the boards. Silence returned. Clara stood there, with creek water running past her boots. 3 days of work. A ruined bearing. Money she could not comfortably waste. And an old grain mill that had moved less under power than it had when she turned the shaft by hand. That afternoon, she sat on an overturned bucket beside the machine. The auction tag was still tied to the frame. $50. For the first time since bringing the mill home, Clara reached up to tear it off. Maybe Mason had been right. Maybe she had spent $50 on something that should have stayed in the weeds. Her fingers touched the tag, then stopped. Because the problem was not that the creek had failed to move the machine, it had moved it. Just badly. Clara looked from the large mill pulley to the much smaller pulley she had mounted on the water wheel shaft. Then she took a tape measure from her pocket. The next morning, she did not rebuild the wheel. She measured pulleys. Because Clara was beginning to suspect the creek had not said no, she had simply asked it the wrong question. For 2 evenings, Clara did almost nothing but measure. The water wheel pulley, the mill pulley, the shaft diameter, the distance between them. Then she sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started drawing circles. What she had been trying to do was make the creek spin the mill faster. That was the mistake. The creek was never going to behave like an electric motor. It moved slowly, but it moved all day. And slow power, Clara realized, was still power if you used it correctly. So she stopped asking how to make the water wheel faster. She started asking how to make each turn matter more. The next Saturday, she changed the pulley arrangement. She replaced the belt. She opened the bearing housing, cleaned out grease that had hardened almost like candle wax, and installed the new bearing she had bought with money she had meant to use for fence repairs. Then she reset the grinding stones. Not tight, not loose, just close enough to catch the grain without binding. By late afternoon, she was ready. Clara opened the wooden gate above the race. Water struck the paddles. The wheel began to turn. The belt tightened. This time the mill did not jerk. It moved. One slow revolution. Then another. Clara poured a handful of corn into the hopper. For several seconds, nothing came out. Then a few broken kernels appeared beneath the stones. Then more. A rough stream of cracked corn began falling into the bucket. Clara picked some up and rubbed it between her fingers. It was uneven. It was warm. It was nowhere near perfect. But it was grain that had been whole 30 seconds earlier. For the first time in decades, that mill was doing what it had been built to do. Clara let it run. 5 minutes. 8. 11. Then she smelled hot metal. She shut the water gate immediately. The mill coasted to a stop. The new bearing was warmer than it should have been. Clara stood there looking at the small bucket of cracked corn. Making the old mill turn, she understood, had only been the first problem. Now she had to find out whether she could make it keep turning. For the better part of 6 months, nobody in Cedar Hollow paid much attention to what Clara was doing behind that barn. In winter, they saw smoke coming from her chimney. In spring, they saw her truck at the hardware store with belts, grease, and bearing boxes in the passenger seat. By early summer, most people had forgotten about the $50 mill entirely. What they did not see were the hours after supper when Clara went back to the barn with a flashlight, a notebook, and grease already worked into the cracks of her hands. Her first real endurance test lasted 18 minutes. The bearing heated again. Clara shut the mill down, loosened the assembly, checked alignment, and started over. The next test lasted 37 minutes, then 94. Each failure told her something. A belt running slightly crooked, a shaft carrying more side load than she expected, a stone set too tight after warming, a wooden water gate flexing under pressure and changing the wheel speed just enough to matter. She stopped treating the mill like one machine. It was a chain, water to wheel, wheel to shaft, shaft to belt, belt to stone, and every weak link showed itself eventually. Clara wrote everything down: run time, bearing temperature, belt tension, stone clearance, amount of grain processed, what she changed before the next test. As winter gave way to spring, the tests grew longer. 3 hours, then 4, then nearly 5. She even tested during lower summer flow, when the creek gave her less water than it had in March. The mill slowed, but it kept working. Then, on a warm Saturday in early summer, Clara poured corn into the hopper shortly after noon and did not close the water gate until 6 hours later. No burning smell, no thrown belt, no binding stone, just the rhythm of water outside and cracked grain collecting inside the barn. When she finally shut it down, roughly 1,200 pounds of processed grain sat in sacks along the wall. Still slow compared with Mason's commercial grinder, painfully slow if speed was the only thing that mattered, but steady, repairable, and powered by water that had been flowing behind Clara's barn long before anyone ran an electric line down that road. Clara wrote the 6-hour result in her notebook. Then she closed it. Nobody in town knew. Mason certainly did not. And Clara was not ready to tell him. Because proving the mill could work when nobody needed it was one thing. Finding out what it was worth when somebody finally did, that was something else. Mason Reed came by on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was outside tightening bolts on the water wheel frame when she heard his truck stop near the barn. He stepped out, looked toward the creek, then followed the moving belt with his eyes until it disappeared through the wall. "So you actually got it running?" Clara wiped her hands on a rag. "I did." Mason walked inside. The mill was turning steadily, dropping cracked corn into a wooden bin. He did not laugh this time. That mattered. He checked the pulley arrangement, looked at the shaft alignment, leaned close enough to listen to the bearing housing. Then he pointed at it. "That's a pretty common agricultural bearing size." Clara glanced at him. "Common is good. I've probably still got 1 or 2 of those sitting in the back room." He looked at the rest of the machine again. "You did good work." Clara nodded. Then Mason looked at the grain coming through. "How much an hour?" she told him. He did the calculation almost immediately. "My grinder will do that before breakfast." There was no cruelty in the statement. That was what made it harder to dismiss. Mason's equipment was newer, faster, and built to process more grain in an hour than Clara's mill could handle in most of a day. On that measurement, he was completely right. Clara reached over and adjusted the feed gate. "I never said mine was faster." Mason looked at her. "Then what's the point?" For a moment, the only sound in the barn was the slow thump of the belt and water turning the wheel outside. Clara glanced toward the creek. "It doesn't have an extension cord." Mason smiled, not quite a laugh. "Clara, the power hasn't gone out long enough to matter in years." "Maybe." He shrugged, wished her luck, and drove away. 3 weeks later, the weather radio started warning about a storm line building west of the county. By Friday afternoon, the sky had turned the color of old iron, and by midnight, nearly every light in Cedar Hollow was gone. The power failed at 12:17 Friday night. Most people in Cedar Hollow barely noticed. A few digital clocks went dark. Refrigerators stopped humming. Porch lights disappeared one house at a time until the whole valley looked the way it had before rural electrification. By breakfast, everybody had the same opinion. It would be back soon. Mason Reed hauled a portable generator behind his feed building and had part of his operation running before noon. The gas station opened on backup power. People filled cans. Someone at the diner said crews were already working east of the highway. Nobody was worried yet. But Saturday evening became Sunday morning. Sunday became Monday, and the outage began changing shape. The storm had dropped cottonwoods across feeder lines, damaged poles along 2 county roads, and left crews working through places they could barely reach. It had changed Clara's creek, too. The water behind the barn ran higher and darker than normal, carrying leaves, sticks, corn stalks, and once the broken half of a fence post. By Sunday afternoon, debris had packed against the entrance to the mill race. The wheel began turning unevenly. Clara heard the change before she saw it. A slow pull, a pause. Then another pull. She shut the gate and climbed down to the intake. Mud came over the tops of her boots. She spent nearly an hour dragging branches free and clearing grass from the narrow channel. Then she wired a crude debris screen across the intake, using stock panel, fence wire, and 2 steel posts driven into the bank. It did not make the creek safer. It made the creek manageable. That mattered, because the same water giving Clara power could take that power away if she stopped paying attention. By the 3rd day, Mason was rationing diesel. Generators could make electricity. They could not make fuel. By the 4th day, deliveries were behind. Electric augers sat useless over full grain bins. Feed mixers that depended on grid power stayed silent. Farmers who normally thought about grain in tons started thinking about it in buckets. Clara was not untouched by any of it. Her freezer was warming. Her well pump only ran when she borrowed a small generator from a neighbor. She charged her phone in the truck and cooked outside because the electric range was dead. The old mill did not solve those problems. It solved one problem. And every morning, Clara walked the intake first. She pulled leaves from the screen, checked the water gate, watched the wheel for any uneven movement. Then she let the creek do what electricity could not. By late afternoon on the 4th day, she was clearing the last clump of grass from the screen when she heard tires on gravel. A pickup stopped outside the barn. A man Clara knew from 3 farms over climbed out and lowered the tailgate. 2 sacks of corn sat in the bed. He looked at the creek, then at the turning wheel, then at Clara. For the first time since the auction, nobody was laughing. "Does that old thing actually work?" he asked. The farmer's name was Henry Cole. He raised beef cattle north of town and kept 26 weaned calves in a separate lot. Under normal circumstances, he would never have driven sacks of corn to Clara Bennett's barn. Normally, his grain went through powered equipment before it ever reached a feed bunk. But normal had ended 4 days earlier. Henry lowered the tailgate. 2 sacks of corn sat in the truck. "I've got hay," he said. "They're not going hungry tonight." Clara waited. Henry rubbed one hand across his jaw. "What I don't have is my roller or mixer." The outage had left him with whole grain, supplement, and roughage, but no practical way to prepare the small ration the calves had been getting every day. He had already stretched the last mixed feed into 2 smaller feedings, one that morning, one he was saving for dark. After that, he would have to change the ration, and Henry did not want to make that change suddenly if he could avoid it. "I just need enough process to get me through tomorrow," he said. That changed the size of the problem. He was not asking Clara to feed his operation for a week. He was asking her to buy him another day. Clara looked toward the mill race first. The debris screen she had built after the storm was holding, leaves and small sticks pressed against one side, but the water beyond it was moving cleanly into the channel. The wheel was turning evenly. Only then did she look at Henry's sacks. "Bring one in." He carried the first sack to the hopper. Clara opened the water gate a little farther. The wheel picked up. The runner stone settled into its slow rhythm over the bedstone. Corn disappeared into the feed opening. Cracked grain began falling into the sack below. Henry did not say anything. He just watched. After the first bag, Clara stopped the mill and put her palm against the bearing housing. Warm, not hot. She checked the water wheel, then the intake, then started again. Halfway through the second sack, the sound of the stones changed. Clara closed the feed gate immediately. Henry looked up. "Problem? Maybe." She adjusted the stone clearance by less than the width of a fingernail. Restarted. The sound disappeared. By dusk, both sacks were finished. Henry crouched beside one and pushed his hand into the cracked grain. He let it run slowly through his fingers. For the first time since arriving, his shoulders dropped. "How much do I owe you?" Clara named a number barely high enough to cover wear and maintenance. Henry paid without arguing. Before climbing into his truck, he looked back toward the creek, then at the bags. "My brother's got hogs 6 miles east." Clara nodded. "He in the same shape?" Henry gave a tired smile. "Worse. He's got grain?" "Plenty." Henry rested one hand on the truck door. "He just doesn't have anything turning." The next morning, Clara walked to the intake before sunrise. She cleared a branch from the debris screen, opened the gate, then looked toward the road. 3 pickup trucks were already waiting, and behind the third one, another set of headlights was coming over the hill. By the 6th day without power, word had traveled farther than Clara expected. Not through advertisements, not through the county office, mostly through pickup trucks. One farmer told another at the gas station. A hog producer mentioned it at the feed store. Henry Cole's brother sent a neighbor from the east side of the county. By noon, Clara had 8 trucks waiting. By the 7th day, there were 14. That was when she realized she needed rules. The mill could keep running. What it could not do was replace every commercial grinder in Cedar Hollow. So Clara started writing names on a chalkboard beside the barn door. Farm, type of livestock, how much processed feed they had left, and one limit at the top, 1 emergency batch per farm. Enough to bridge the immediate shortage, not enough to fill a feed bin for a week. People unloaded smaller loads, waited their turn, helped carry finished feed back to trucks. Some paid cash, others traded what they had: eggs, diesel, a box of new belts. One man who had neither money nor useful supplies spent 4 hours helping Clara move sacks. Nobody seemed to mind. The mill was slow, but every batch gave somebody time. Another night, another morning. Another day for the roads to open or the power to return. By the 9th morning, the line stretched past Clara's mailbox. That was when Walt Mercer noticed the old auction tag still hanging from the iron frame. He leaned closer. $50? Clara was checking the temperature of a bearing. "What? You really paid $50 for this thing?" She looked at the tag. The paper was dirty now, stained with grease and creek spray, but the number was still readable. "Yeah," Walt laughed once. There was no mockery in it. "Best $50 anybody spent this year." Clara shook her head. "That's just what nobody else wanted to pay." Then she went back to the machine. By noon, the chalkboard was full. By 2 o'clock, Clara stopped accepting new names. That was when the mood changed. She had water. She had grain waiting. She had a working mill. But she did not have enough hours for everybody. A rancher offered extra money to move ahead. Another farmer said his young stock could not wait until morning. Clara looked at the board again. Until then, the hard part had been keeping machinery moving. Now she had a different problem. Machines never asked Clara whose need came first. People did. The first man to offer Clara extra money arrived just after 3 that afternoon. His name was Earl Haskins, and he ran one of the larger cattle operations west of Cedar Hollow. He had 6 sacks of corn in the truck and a folded stack of bills in his shirt pocket. "I'll pay triple," he said. Clara looked at the chalkboard. Earl was number 19. "You'll pay the same as everybody else. I'm not asking for a discount. I know." He lowered his voice. "I'm asking you to move me up." For the first time all day, Clara stopped moving. The mill needed another belt soon. The main bearing had begun making her nervous. Cash would help, and Earl had enough money in his hand to cover both. Then Clara looked farther down the list. Number 11 belonged to Ruth Keller, small place south of town, 32 calves, enough processed feed left for one more morning. Ruth had already been waiting 5 hours. She had not asked once when her turn was coming. A patched feed sack rested against her boots, and every few minutes she glanced toward the chalkboard without saying anything. Clara folded the bills back into Earl's hand. "I can't." His face changed. "You've got people lined up to the road, Clara. You're telling me money doesn't matter? It matters. Then take it." Clara picked up a piece of chalk. Under the list of names, she wrote 2 lines in large block letters. Same rate. Then beneath it, order by need. Earl stared at the board. "So now you decide whose animals matter more?" "No," Clara said. "I decide who runs out first." Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Ruth looked down at her boots. Earl shoved the money back into his pocket. "You're going to regret doing business this way." "Maybe." Clara turned back toward the mill. The next sacks through belonged to Ruth. After that came a hog farmer whose feed bin was nearly empty. Then a family with dairy cows. Clara did not make everyone happy. That was impossible now. But something changed in the line. People stopped asking how much extra it would cost to move forward. They started asking who needed to go before them. By late afternoon, 2 farmers had voluntarily traded places. A third gave up half his batch to someone with younger livestock. The old mill was still grinding grain, but Clara had learned that keeping a machine running was easier than deciding what to do when too many people depended on it. She was standing beside the chalkboard when a familiar pickup turned onto the gravel road. "Mason." He slowed when he saw the line. Then he saw the words Clara had written beneath the names. Same rate, order by need. He parked at the very end. Mason Reed waited nearly 20 minutes before he walked into the barn. Not because anyone stopped him, because for the first time in years, nobody was waiting for Mason Reed to tell them what to do. Farmers moved sacks. Clara checked the stones. Someone swept spilled grain from the floor. The old mill turned with the same slow rhythm it had kept all morning. Mason stood near the doorway and watched. His eyes followed the water-driven belt, then the pulley, then the grain falling into the sack below. Finally, he looked at Clara. "How long has it been running?" "Since 5:30. "Yesterday?" Clara glanced at him. "This morning." Mason nodded once. That was all. He walked closer to the machine. The $50 auction tag was still hanging from the frame. He noticed it. Clara noticed him noticing it. Neither of them said anything. A few minutes later, Mason explained why he had come. One of his regular customers had nearly 200 head of cattle and grain sitting in storage. His generator could keep lights and a few smaller systems running. It could not carry Mason's grinder long enough to process what the man needed. "I told him I'd ask you." Clara looked toward the chalkboard. "How much feed does he have left?" "Maybe tomorrow morning." Then put his name up. Mason hesitated. "You want to know what I'll pay?" "No." She pointed at the board. "Put down when he runs out." For the first time, Mason read both lines carefully. Same rate, order by need. He took the chalk. An hour later, Mason was still there, not standing in the doorway, working. He carried sacks from trucks, helped an older farmer tie off finished feed bags. When the hopper ran low, He lifted grain into it himself. 9 months earlier, Mason had estimated the mill's value by what a scrapyard might pay for its iron. Now he was feeding corn into it with both hands. Clara never mentioned the auction. She did not need to. Then, sometime after 6, the mill made a sound she had never heard before. Not loud, just a faint metallic rasp beneath the turning stones. Clara froze. Mason heard it too. What was that? She was already reaching for the water gate. The wheel slowed. The belt went slack. And for the first time since people had started lining up at her farm, the old mill stopped. The silence inside Clara's barn lasted less than 5 seconds. Then everyone started talking at once. How long? Can you get it going again? I've been waiting since noon. Clara ignored the questions. She put one hand against the bearing housing. Too hot, much hotter than it had been during any of her tests. The faint metallic rasp had come from the main shaft bearing, and Clara knew exactly what happened if she tried to squeeze another hour out of it. Heat became friction. Friction became damage. Damage became a shaft that would not turn at all. One farmer looked at the half-filled hopper. Can't you just finish what's already in there? Clara shook her head. If I run it hot, nobody gets grain tomorrow. That answer did not make the line shorter, but she closed the water gate anyway. For the next half hour, Clara pulled the guard, loosened the belt, and opened the bearing housing while Mason held a flashlight. The grease inside had darkened. The bearing surface showed enough wear to explain the sound. Clara sat back on her heels. I need another one. Mason looked at the housing. Then at the bearing in her hand. A memory returned to him faster than it did to Clara. That's the one. She looked up. What? The bearing I told you about months ago. He was already standing. I said I probably had one in the back room. Clara remembered. Barely. Mason was moving toward the truck. My shop. Your shop doesn't have power. He opened the door. I don't need power to open a parts bin. 40 minutes later, Mason returned carrying a dusty cardboard box. Inside was the replacement he had remembered from the day he first inspected Clara's mill. Same standard housing pattern, same shaft size. The kind of ordinary agricultural part nobody thought much about, until it was the one part keeping an entire machine from turning. Clara checked it herself before installing anything. Then she pulled the worn bearing, cleaned the housing, installed the replacement, reset the shaft, aligned the pulley, tensioned the belt. Mason never tried to take over. He held the light, handed her tools, waited. Finally, Clara opened the water gate. The wheel turned, the belt tightened. Everyone listened. No rasp, no heat, just stone against grain. A cheer started near the barn door. Clara barely heard it. She was watching the new bearing. Mason stood beside her. After a minute, he said quietly, Power company says maybe tomorrow evening. Clara looked toward the chalkboard. There were still 12 names left. If the estimate was right, the old mill only had to survive one more day. If it was wrong, nobody knew how many. On the 14th morning, Clara opened the water gate before sunrise. Her hands were swollen. There was belt dust on her coat, grain in her hair, and a coffee cup on the workbench that had been reheated so many times it tasted more like metal than coffee. The chalkboard beside the barn door was almost empty. Most of the names had been crossed out. 3 remained. The mill kept turning. Outside, the creek moved through the same narrow channel it had followed before the storm, over the same old stone drop, past the same barn, before the trucks, before the chalkboard. Before anybody in Cedar Hollow cared whether a 100-year-old grain mill could run without electricity, by late afternoon, the last emergency batch came off the stones. Clara tied the sack shut. Then something flickered overhead. The fluorescent light above the workbench blinked once, twice, then stayed on. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Across the valley, pumps restarted. Freezers hummed. Well motors came back to life. Electric augers woke up. 14 days after the storm, the grid had returned. The old mill did not notice. Its runner stone kept turning at exactly the same speed. Mason stood near the hopper. He looked up at the fluorescent light, then through the open barn door toward the water wheel. Electricity had returned in an instant. The creek had never left. "I was measuring the wrong thing," he said. Clara looked at him. Mason nodded toward the mill. "I kept asking how fast it could grind." He paused. "Should have asked what happened when mine stopped." Clara said nothing. She did not need to. For 9 months, Mason had measured the old mill by output, horsepower, and the price of scrap iron. Now he was measuring it by 14 days. The lights were back. The emergency was ending. By the next morning, Mason's modern grinder would be doing what it did best again, working faster than Clara's ever could. But the question those 2 weeks had left behind was harder to switch off. Once people had seen what happened when one system failed, would they go back to depending on only one? A month after the power returned, Cedar Hollow looked normal again. Mason's grinder was back to doing what it had always done best. It was faster than Clara's mill, cleaner, more efficient. On a busy morning, it could process in an hour what Clara's water-driven stones needed most of the day to finish. Nobody pretended otherwise. That was never the lesson. The difference was what sat beside Mason's main drive now. A PTO shaft, a manual engagement lever, and a second power path that did not depend on the grid. Clara first saw it when Mason pulled into her yard carrying a rolled sheet of paper beneath one arm. He found her inside the barn checking belt tension. Without saying much, he spread the drawing across her workbench. It was a backup drive system for his grinder. Tractor-powered, simple enough to engage without rewiring half the building. Mason tapped one corner of the drawing. "I think this keeps the main shaft within range." Clara studied it, then studied it again. Mason waited. Less than a year earlier, he had looked at her rusted mill and decided its value before asking how it worked. Now he was standing in her barn, asking the opposite question. "What am I missing?" Clara glanced up at him. There was no satisfaction in her face, no smile that said, "I told you so." She pulled the drawing closer. "You're putting too much load on this bearing." Mason leaned in. Clara pointed to the shaft. "If the tractor surges, that's where you'll feel it first." He nodded. Then he took out a pencil. For the next 40 minutes, the two of them stood over the workbench changing dimensions. Mason asked questions. Clara challenged assumptions. Neither of them talked about the auction. They did not need to. Outside, the creek kept moving. Inside, the old mill sat quiet. For once, it did not need to prove anything, because the most important thing Clara had built during those 14 days was no longer turning in her barn. It was starting to show up in other people's thinking. A year later, the old mill was still in Clara Bennett's barn. She did not run it every day. She did not need to. Most weeks, the electric systems worked exactly as they were supposed to. Trucks arrived on schedule. Mason's grinder handled the heavy loads. Life in Cedar Hollow returned to the quiet efficiency people had grown used to. But once a month, Clara opened the water gate. She checked the belt, greased the bearings, measured the stone clearance. Then she let the creek turn the wheel. Not because she was waiting for another disaster, because a backup only mattered if it still worked when you finally needed it. The $50 auction tag remained on the wall beside the mill. The paper had faded. One corner had torn loose, but the number was still there, $50. Visitors sometimes asked why Clara kept it. She usually shrugged. What could she say? $50 had bought her a rusted frame, worn stones, frozen pulleys, and months of work. It had also bought her something nobody at the auction had been bidding on, a second way, a way to keep grain moving when the power stopped, a way to understand the machine instead of simply depending on it, and, maybe most important, a way not to stand helpless in the dark again. The mill had never needed to be faster than Mason's machine. It only needed to keep turning on the day his couldn't. People had laughed because they thought Clara was buying a machine from the past. But what she had really bought for $50 was one more way forward.